start off with, let me introduce my colleague on the right, Shri Anshul Mishra. He is the Additional Director at the All India Institute of Medical Sciences. Don't take that wrong, he has a very strong urban background. Significant experience in governance, policy making, and urban development, including as member secretary of the Chennai Metropolitan Development Committee. He oversaw the preparation of the city's third master plan over there, and we'll definitely hear insights from him on that. We have Rana Hassan here from the Asian Development Bank. He's a regional lead economist, South Asia in Asian Development Bank's Economic Research and Development Impact Department. His research areas and interests include industrial development, labor economics, urban economics, and poverty and inequality. Going around the table now, we have Dr. Purnima Dore. She is the CEO of Dorian Scale and former director at Tata Trust. She's a practicing economist driving impact to finance, public policy, innovation, and digital transformation. She's also the author of Regional Economic Diversity, Lessons from an Emergent India. We have Jagan Shah. He is CEO of Afrovision Foundation, an advocacy think tank focused on transforming infrastructure for cities, public transport, agriculture, healthcare, and energy. His previous roles include being the director of the National Institute of Urban Affairs and senior fellow at Artha Global. We also had Shantamay Chatterjee. He is the director at Project Concern International India, where he focuses on livelihoods with Women's Economic Empowerment Growth Center. He has deep experience working on sustainable development and economic growth opportunities with governments, multilateral development banks, UN agencies, NGOs, and CSR foundations. I have the pleasure of also welcoming Dr. Amita Bide. Thank you. She's professor at the Center for Urban Policy and Governance, School of Habitat Studies, Tata Institute of Social Sciences. With deep engagement in urban marginalized communities and housing rights, she has led several action research initiatives aimed at building inclusive models of urban development in Indian cities. I will also introduce Madam Tara once she is here. But to move forward, I request my colleague Paramjit Chavna to make the opening introductory presentation.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I'll just give a brief context presentation on our session informing first generation economic strategy for India's city regions. So I'll set the state of the discourse and then move on to WRI India's contribution as well. So setting the discourse, we first identify a couple of issues, which the reason why we have started on this work is that first of all is that we see India as the world's most populous system of urban and rural settlements. And on the right-hand side, as you see this figure, we see that city regions with population greater than 3 million are at the center. Then we have mid to large cities, small to mid cities, so on. And then we have about 5 to 6 lakh villages as well. Now, it's important to understand the urban dynamic as well because India has 5 out of the world's 30 largest agglomerations as well. Going ahead, we also understand that the previous slide was based out of census and this is based on the contiguously built urban agglomeration as well. And we see that there has been a transformation because there are giant agglomerations, there are contiguous urban stretches, and then there are transitioning areas which are now moving from villages to urban areas as well. Which brings us to the example of Delhi, which is a true case of an agglomeration. And we see that the Delhi agglomeration is going beyond its boundary and the contiguously built urban agglomeration is also expanding over time. The next concern that we come to is the economic aspect of the same. We see that cities are basically the engines of growth as well. But we also see that majority of the large firms are predominant in mega cities, whereas the small firms are predominant across all size classes, across different kinds of agglomeration, which employ the most people. But these small firms are where innovation is possible and there are opportunities for innovative startups as well. The next issue that we come to and we understand is that there is some dichotomy between what is urban growth versus what is industrial growth. And there have been multiple efforts that have been made in the past, much like the Industrial Area Development Board, Special Economic Zones. But only in 2009, there have been efforts which have enmeshed the urban and the industry. And currently, we have the Viksit Bharat and the Growth Hub by the Niti Aayog, and the current one, which is the Urban Challenge one by the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs. We also understand that there are concerns of lack of integration between the urban and the economy, where we see the case of Whitefield, which is on the right-hand side. We see that Whitefield is one of the areas which has the ITS sectors in Bangalore. And we also see that the road density there is actually quite less. So even though economic development and industries are present there, the presence of urban infrastructure is following the same. So it is difficult to retrofit the same as well. The other set of concerns that come up are more about the inefficient allocation of resources, where we see two major concerns. There is information asymmetry, because of which there is poor planning for informal workers as well, that there are negative externalities which lead to environmental and health hazard concerns as well. We also see that cities are engines of economic growth, where majority of your employment and GDP will be concentrated. However, what we miss out is that the informal economy also contributes majorly to the GDP of the cities as well. However, they are not accounted for. Much like the new gig economy, the food delivery services, all of them fall into the informal economy and therefore need to be formalized. So that intersection of urban and understanding of informal economy also needs to be understood. The third concern that we have is that cities are also vulnerable to multiple environmental and climate hazards. So we should also keep in mind that as we are going toward industrial and economic growth, the 10x growth in that economy should not lead to increased air pollution, unmanaged waste, or poor health outcomes per se. So after this context, I move to what WRI India's work in contribution has did. So one of the works that we've done is the research of the Delhi NCR economic geography. As I said, the Delhi is one of the true agglomerations. On this map, we see the employment size and the establishment, where the blue dots are indicative of your service sector and the orange and the brown ones are indicative of your manufacturing sector. This has been taken from economic census itself. And we see that the majority of establishments and employment is concentrated around the core NCT as well as the peripheral regions. The next slide, which is again from the same research of morphology of Delhi NCR, we also see that the Delhi core NCT, which is at the center, is also following out, and the jobs are also moving towards the periphery, which you see it from 1990 to 2013-14. The orange bar has increased, which is your peripheral employment as well. The next set of work that we've done is with the NITI Aayog, which is the Surat Growth Hubs work, where 4 pilot regions were taken up. And one of the regions in which we did a deep dive was the Surat Economic Region, which consisted of 6 districts. And what we found was that from this, from the baselining of the existing situation, we understood the endowments that are there. We understood what are the key economic drivers, like the diamond hub, the chemical hub, the textile hub. We also understood what is the potential of the sunrise sectors, like the untapped tourism potential as well as agro processing. All of this keeping in mind 2 main things. One is the strategic regional connectivity and infrastructure. And second, ensuring that all of this is happening, keeping in mind the green shift, which is what brings us to the next slide, which is the flood risk analysis for Surat city as well. We also know that these cities which have a lot of economic weightage also are prone to disasters as well. And we see that Surat had about multiple floods, and there was a severe flood in 2006 as well. And from the current analysis that the organization did, we saw that 33% of Surat urban development or the area actually was under moderate to high risk of floods as well. And based on all of these factors, there was a mapping out of all of the potential projects that can be done for the Surat economic region, being from chemical sector to tourism to sea shipping, etc. This brings us to the last piece of work that we'll be discussing here. That's on Bodoland. Bodoland territorial region is falling under the 6th scheduled area. It's a combination of 5 districts which are there in Assam. And we see on this slide that this is a land suitability analysis that was done to understand what is the potential of urban expansion, what is the suitability for urban development in these areas. And as you can see, the greener and the bluer shades indicate reserve forests and national parks, whereas the orange ones indicate the high suitability for urban development. I'll just pause, maybe. What is it? Okay. Go to the last slide then. So Based on the land suitability analysis for Bodoland territorial region and the existing situation that we analyzed spatial and statistical analysis, we came up with multiple strategies. So there are two sets of strategies presented here. On the left-hand side, you see the economic strategies, which were rooted in compact regional development, which were focusing on enhancing connectivity, much like expanding roads and ensuring that there is enough road density to ensure economic development. There was also focus on value addition for place-based rural enterprises, such as on thematics of sericulture, agriculture, food. And then last year, most importantly, the focus was on community-led local entrepreneurship as well. On the governance and finance aspect, we also see two main strategies. One was on building robust institutions, and the second is also on ensuring fiscal strength and economic stability. The idea was also focused on ensuring that there are multiple streams of revenues as well, and that they're able to access capital through innovative techniques as well, and that they're ready for that regional economic development. But I pause on the work contribution and I'll focus on the key thematic areas for this panel as well. So these will be the main key concerns. First one, focusing on the enmeshing of the urban and the economic industrial development. Second, focusing on the informal economy. And lastly, focusing on the sustainability aspects, which create concerns for cities as well. So I pause here. I'll read this slide.
Thank you, Parvit, for summarizing the context of India, its urbanization and its economic development initiatives over time, and highlighting some of WRIT's work. I just wanted to welcome Madam Tara, who's just come in. Shipti Tara is Additional Secretary, Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, Government of India. She has previously held significant roles in urban development, including as Joint Secretary Amrut and Mahua, and various leadership positions in Gujarat. We wanted to introduce all the other panelists, so welcome to you. Closing on what Manish was talking about, at the Indian context, you see that globally, many city regions proactively plan for their economic development. They don't leave it to chance because it is very competitive, the attraction of talent, all of this requires committed efforts. And with this thought, we've seen that the Indian government has now looked at focusing at approaches for economic development now. And recently we've seen the announcement of the Urban Challenge Fund. So, Madam Tara, if we could start with your opening remarks on this. We'd like to hear Government of India's plans because there's an ambitious Urban Challenge Fund that has been announced. Would you share some thinking behind the same, ma'am?
Good afternoon. Sorry for being late as usual. One thing to another. I can only say that, when we are looking at this, suddenly, somebody thinks that we are now looking at economic development plan of cities. I take a step back and say that when you look at cities, people are there because it is economic development which is driving the cities. What has to be done is, see, you just visualize what you are talking about. Government can come up, if you want to do an economic development of a city, how do you do it? One is promote manufacturing or services. You promote manufacturing, creation of wealth through a positive, proactive activity. That is one of the ways you do a economic development. You say that, okay, I'm going to do a industrial estate, I'm going to connect this road, improve the logistics. Now, all that is to reach a end goal of providing livelihood and therefore quality of living for the people. But unfortunately, many of our cities, when they give economic strength to a laborer, doesn't give quality of living to the laborer. This is what has to be really understood in its elements. Sometimes we miss real basic fundamentals because we are talking big jargons. So the most important thing in an economic development is nothing but, if you are looking at economic development of a city, whether we do X or Y, the amount of GDP and services and manufacturing which happens. Maybe it is marginally less, or it is maybe 30-40% less because there are so many inefficiencies. But what is the effect on quality of life of the citizen? Because just because somebody comes, for example, Delhi, people came from so far and they are providing cheap labor in Delhi, right? I mean, you do get a person who can work for 15,000 rupees per month in Delhi easily. Don't you get 18,000, 20,000? But this 20,000 when he is earning, what's happening to his existence in this space? So, when you're talking about economic development of cities, sometimes it is as simple as providing quality, efficient, basic infrastructure services. You don't need to develop economically somebody. There has to be understanding of economic development from citizen level point of view, city level point of view, and global level point of view. When you're talking about economic development from the global level point of view, then it is about quality benchmarking of the product, manufacturing processes, services, and the way you handle it. When the city level point of view, then it is about how easily you are able to evacuate the goods in what time and what are the processes to get permissions and so on and so forth. But ultimately, all this should be linked to only one thing, and that is citizens' quality of living. That simply means giving clean water, proper road, proper social infrastructure of health and education, proper livelihood, proper living spaces. Somebody should be able to afford a living space there. This means deregulating the land markets. This means deregulating the way the people access their services. This means provision of the best services in the worst of the wards. This means a person should be able to live in 20 square meter house or 200 square meter house. There is a basic minimum service available to that person free of pollution. So, when we talk about economic development, you need to have complete understanding. This has now become a the in word. हम economic plan बनाएंगे cities का. आप बनाओ नहीं बनाओ, economic activity cities में चलेगा ही चलेगा, because there's so much labor coming into the cities. There is an aggregation, there is interfaces, there is going to be an employment opportunity and economic opportunity. But it is not translating into sustainable, efficient, qualitative life for the citizen who's coming and engaging in the economic livelihood. Now, to correct that, what do you do? One, you are carrying, our cities are so many years old. One, you are carrying the burden of the legacy in terms of infrastructure. Another, you are also carrying the burden of non-planning, planning following development rather than preceding development. And third is, planning is such a broad word that anything and everything is termed as planning, and there are so many urban planners. We don't have specialists in planning a residential neighborhood versus an industrial neighborhood. And how do you disaggregate these things to remove the inefficiencies but connect them to provide efficiencies? This is a very important, and also safety. The moment, so all these are the paradigms which have to be looked at, which we don't look at. We call our economic development means this is a manufacturing hub. So you're looking at a wholesale level, that you have a port, how fast you reach the port. Well, that is one level of engagement to find out. That is very important. At the same time, when the loading, unloading happens, that space, how should it be? How it should yield to a efficient way of doing it. How does the labor react there? Where is the toilet for them? Where is the medical facility for them? What do they eat? And what are the other ills which is haunting them? So, we have not set standards for it. We think urban planning kar do, or land use planning, everything can get sorted out. Land use planning mein abhi economic layer add ho raha hai. And none of us have thought through this. I think we really need to go to the elements of city economic plan. City economic plan should also have important thing of economic plan for citizens. If I'm able to stay on the metro corridor in Delhi, able to spend, only 20% of my earning on the transit, and I don't have risk of getting stranded, I don't have risk of getting affected. See, Delhi is a classic case where we can demonstrate how an economic plan can work, because it is having 400 kilometers of metro network. Today, Delhi, and where is the activity, where is the network? Connect karo, you have to connect these two things. It's not regions. There is one level regional planning. Regional planning is like Gurgaon se log aate jate, wo already connected hai. Okay. Highways don't play connectivity. Transit plays connectivity. So highways are for logistics and goods, whereas transit is the one which moves people, which can also move goods. Nobody says metro cannot move goods. Why should metro not move goods in the off time? That's something which our secretary asked, which I really endorse. We should look at it. What could be the design change in some of this, that you don't need to, you can use the same metro line for evacuating things. But it's not easy. It's always, there is always, if everything could be combined, there would be efficiencies. Aisa nahi hota hai. There are certain things which have to be disaggregated. But my request is, let us look at economic plan and regional plan from this point of view. So at a micro level, it's the citizen. At the macro level, it is the numbers. So these are two different paradigms, and they have to be connected seamlessly. This is all I have to say. And as far as the Urban Challenge Fund, which Rajit mentioned, we are coming up with, supporting all the bankable projects to retrofit your redevelopment angle of old cities. We're coming up with parlance for retrofitting the legacy infrastructure. We're also coming up with, something as growth hubs if you want to take up any projects which can help you. But all that still will not yield the desirable results for the citizens unless you really look at what is that citizen space, where is he living, how is his small space of shelter interacting with the public spaces, qualitative public spaces, the moment he steps out of his house, are we able to provide safe, clean access, affordable access to his livelihood? Because livelihood is anyway available. That's why people are coming. Underemployment or full employment, whatever. But at least they are coming here, they're finding that they are getting 10 or 12 or 15,000 rupees or 18,000 or 20,000 rupees. But what is that they're spending it on? We should do a study of it. And what can be done to remove that inefficiency from their lives is something which we should work on. So I think we are looking at that kind of balance, and you will soon see once it is approved, it's under the processes, you will soon see the draft. There could be so many more improvisation in any format. You can always do. I would request all of you to look at economic plan in a very elementary form, and connecting regions helps. If you have a transit somebody, then the land markets get distributed. Once the land market get distributed, that itself brings in a lot of efficiencies. If you are able to fix it with proper infrastructure. Like it's very heavy to live here. Somebody can live 1 hour away. Or there are models where people live in Delhi for the 5 days of the week, working from a small area and going back to 2 hours later into their village during Saturday, Sunday. Ye bhi maine suna hai. But, whatever happens, I think this is what I would request you should look at.
Thank you very much, Tara ma'am. Also kind of setting the fact that the ultimate goal of economic development is improving quality of life for all and improving safety and security. Thank you for that. I'll now come to Anshul sir, also to give opening remarks, because he was at the helm of the third master plan of Chennai, which really took economic development planning into their urban planning efforts. So we'd like to hear experiences from that, sir.
Thank you, Rajit. Good morning, ma'am. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, ma'am. So we all agree with one point here. I think everybody sitting in this room is that urban planning or master planning of urban areas also require economic planning. Now, it's not easy because traditionally the urban planning has followed the tools which are basically defining the land use, and there is some element of housing, transport, and a bit of industrial plan which is included in the master plan. But there's no economic layer of master plan ever in India. I've not seen any master plan which has this economic layer, this economic geography layer, which is missing. Now, how to do that? So what we need to do is to use this tool of mapping to identify and map the economic activities in a particular region or a space or whatever you call it, It may be a metropolitan area, it may be a city, it may be an agglomeration, but you map it. So you know where are the economic activities happening. Then it becomes very easy for you to plan the entire area, because ultimately it is the space, it is the connection of one place with the other one, which is going to help you plan better. What happens, as ma'am was saying, that people would migrate to the urban areas because economic opportunities are in the urban areas. But what happens when they come in, and you see the problems of housing and transportation, congestion, etc., then you do a catch-up game. You try to provide infrastructure to meet those requirements, those demands. But the whole idea behind planning is that you can think in future, you can look in future, and you plan ahead for meeting these demands. So we know, we do typically you do planning, by doing population projections, right? Now is the time to have that economic angle in population projections. For example, look at jobs, where the jobs are already there, created inside the agglomeration. What is the location of housing? What is the kind of jobs? For example, the gig economies. How can you locate them? Whether you can locate them or not is also a challenge. But those things, if you map, you will have a fair idea of what is happening in the city in economic terms. And then once you do that layer, it's easy for you to do the other layers, where you want to do your housing, where you want to do your transport, where you want to, do other social infrastructure. At present, it is not integrated. That's where the problem is. So we must have heard about how the slum redevelopment or slum rehabilitation sort of failed, not met the expectations. I won't say it has failed, but the most of the cities have found land and created housing for slum dwellers and shifted them there. Now it's very difficult for them to come back to their workplace because it is inside the cities, inside the core city. Now that is a difficulty which every city is facing. So once you locate those economic activities, we'll be able to justify that, okay, we need a social housing or housing for poor inside the core city also. Find land for that and create housing for them. So that's another example. So now to do all of this, you have to conduct studies. So in Chennai, third master plan, which is still under preparation, not finally completed, we undertook 3 separate studies for the economic planning. So one was Sustainable Economic Growth Strategic Plan for CMA, Chennai Metropolitan Area. The other one was Special Distribution of Income and Employment. And the third one was Land Value and Density Study. And the fourth one is about the mobility plan, which is basically the comprehensive mobility plan for the city, which will be integrated in the entire thing to also take care of transit and housing, for the workers. So people come to cities and they have to have a place to live and they have to travel to their workplace. So the transportation, the housing, transportation, and the job, these 3 create cities at the foundation. So these studies have to be conducted, and then you have to integrate this in the land use plan. So we have heard about integrated transport and land use plan, right? We need to now work on integrated economic and land use plan. So that will give you a much better master plan to work upon. I would stop here. There are multiple other things, the challenges which one faces, because the city's economic plan is nothing but, as of now, nothing but the industrial plan. So industries department of all the the states, they decide how the economy is going to look like, how the investment is going to take place, which land is going to be utilized for which industry. That is basically the industrial plan. But this is not the economic planning. That's how we have to look at it, and we have to that is one challenge. Once you make the plan, who is going to implement it? Who is going to take it forward? Which is the entity which is going to implement at the metropolitan level? So that's also a challenge. So these are some challenges which we can discuss more about it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir, and for giving us insights into a targeted approach within master planning to look at economic development as well. I'll now hand over to my colleague Harpreet Arora to run the questions with our panelists. Thank you, Harpreet.
Thank you very much, Rajit. Thank you very much, sir, and thank you, ma'am. I think you've set the tone of the conversation and the sessions very well. And to address that, to make citizens at the center of the economic benefits and the surpluses that flow, I'll probably request Amita ji to answer the first, because, and this is also learning very quickly from your comment in the plenary where we asked you to come in last as a social scientist on contributing to economic. So we're correcting very quickly. Amita ji, what are the ways in which marginalized groups can be included and mainstreamed into economic development planning process? You know, we've heard about the process is very complex. It takes time, sometime long, sometime quite short. Well, what are the ways in which you, in your experience, would want to comment on that? And if you, I know you will have to leave a little early. If you have saved time, maybe hand over another question and to share the examples of the work that you've done in Mumbai. And over to you, ma'am. Thank you.
Is this okay? Audible? Yeah, okay. So thanks firstly, Harpreet, for beginning with that inclusion question first. So there are just 3 or 4 major points that I would like to make here. And the first is that I think when we speak about the informal economy, the first, I think in our cities, we do not have to think of inclusion from the perspective of social welfare. That people, the number of people who are destitutes, not earning, etc., are highly marginal. Okay, there are a few. And interestingly, the way we label perhaps marginalizes them further rather than perhaps puts them back. But everybody works. In my own work in Mumbai, I find that even 60, 65-year-old people also work for a living. Okay, so I think that is a big, in some ways, asset that we have, that people do work. They are looking for dignified opportunities, right? The scale of their work and the uncertainties of work, I think, are the most debilitating conditions. The scale of their work is something that you cannot even call micro. It is often nano, right? So this is the first challenge. And what we have responded with so far, I think, has been more in terms of schemes, right? And rather than a strategy. So in some ways, I felt that the entire experience of the Swanidhi program, which supports street vendors, it indicates to me that we are on the right track. Why on the right track? So firstly, the way it identifies poor people is also on the basis of occupational vulnerability rather than only taking a income-based approach, which I think is an extremely positive thing. Because in our cities, we can straight away say that there are certain groups, domestic workers, street vendors, some elements of the construction sector and waste workers, who are perhaps the most predominant streams. There are others as well. There are home-based workers, etc., etc. But these are more complex reality. But these 4 streams one sees everywhere, almost in all scales of cities. And to begin to recognize that these are economically vulnerable, if not always poor, okay, is perhaps an important thing, and we have taken that right step. Okay. I think what we have also begun recognizing that it is not just enough to give small capital gains, but that there is a larger strategic support in the form of markets, in the form of access to constant working capital which these groups require. And I think that's a beginning. But I say it's a beginning because I think the forces of economic forces itself, because economic forces are not completely controlled by the city, right? So, for example, one is locating the electronics market and the values there, and compare to that the e-waste kind of handling and the incomes over there. There are huge differentials, and the earnings here may not even be enough for a sustained living all through the year, right? So there is a scaling up which is required. Now, this scaling up, which are those institutions which are capable of consistently working with these groups of people, a constant capacity building to ensure that there is a constant, I would say, support as well as capacity building to see that that scaling up genuinely happens. And I see this lack of institutions with this kind of a approach as a most important challenge, but also what indicates that this is the way to go forward. So I would perhaps make this as one important point. The second is the recognition that most economic planning also confines and restricts itself to only looking at the upper scale of things rather than this bottom 40-50%. Okay? And the impacts of that large scale planning on these sectors is also something that we don't recognize. So I think taking these aspects to the forefront perhaps is important. Again, to give an example, again, the waste economy, for example. There is no planning for waste economy at all, though waste offers a good opportunity in terms of wealth creation and particularly for the vulnerable groups. But I've not seen any city talk about it, create material recovery facilities, support them, support waste collectors, and particularly look at the informal waste collectors and how does one integrate them into the entire what should I say, waste governance dimensions, and see that there is a genuine value addition that can happen. And I think that really requires city-based policies, institutions, all of this to come together. There are rare examples of this. One of these being Pune, where the Kagat Kachra Panchayat has consistently worked with the informal waste workers, ensured that they are integrated within the municipal system, not as formal employees, okay, but as consistent service providers, but which then assures them access to waste. Okay. So I think when we talk about formalization of the informal, we have to understand that that formalization alone is not always enough. To ensure dignified livelihoods, one has to take several steps up of the upcycling. The third thing that I would say is being conscious of these larger policy moves and their impacts on the vulnerable sector. I think that cost benefit analysis one has to very, very consciously undertake. And often some of the policy moves completely displace these smaller livelihoods. And I think that is an impact that one can do without. The third is the implementation of policies which are in some ways pro-poor is very poor in our cities. To give one example, the street vending law, okay, has been passed in 2013-14. Right? There are rules which have been made. But how many cities have actually created vendor zones? How have they grappled with the issue of creating and actually according or decided a policy of which plots, how are they to be allotted, whether these are like a de facto property rights on the street that one is giving, or whether it is at least minimum access to formal loans that they can, and creating that stream of continuous investment, right, which a steady claim on the street can actually make. Okay. And that translation has not happened at all. Not even in, for example, Bhubaneswar, one of the claims is that ki Bhubaneswar is a city where there are such street vending zones which have been created. But if you will see this on the ground, there are few zones. There are many more people in vending which have actually not been included in the vending activity at all. So I think there are many, many more steps and escalation and implementation of these policies which are existing but actually not seen on ground. That's what.
Thank you very much. I think you drive the evidence of responsible ward-wise planning and holding governance at the ward. Then, the examples that you've given on the street vendors. I think street vendors actually spot the economic opportunity first because he know where he's going to maximize per square foot revenue than before anybody else on the street comes in. Thank you very much for mentioning that. Can I request Rana? I think this is where we would understand from the perspective of a multilateral. You've worked at many other developing countries, and you're this shift towards the economic development focus and the institutional barriers that possibly you compare Indian cities to other cities, and then how do Indian cities overcome that barrier? Largely not just relying on the conventional wisdom and the failures that the cities have seen in the other part of the world, but the ones that we could also replicate, scale up, as Anshulji said, something that you would want to guide through this panel.
Sure. No, thank you very much. And thank you for inviting me to the panel and for this question. In fact, I got involved in urbanization issues because of my interest in jobs. And I used to do a lot of work on labor regulations, productivity, etc. And as you know, one does more and more work. I came across a study which made this excellent point. They said, look, we all know private sector creates jobs, and that's fine. But really, it's cities that create jobs. So when you look at structural transformation is really about moving from low productivity activities to high productivity activities. Invariably, these tend to be manufacturing and services. And manufacturing and services are most efficiently produced in cities. And it's the agglomeration, the ability of people to mix, etc. When we talk to people from these different consulting firms, they say, look, we have a real problem. All the young professionals want to be in Bangalore. It's super congested. I mean, I like the charts that, you were showing, Paramjit, and yet everyone still wants to go to Bangalore. Everyone wants to be in Gurgaon, increasingly Noida, etc. So urban agglomerations are a fact of life, and there are two things that drive the economies. It's spillover benefits. You're sitting in Bangalore, you're coming up with the idea for a startup, and somebody else, a neighbor, borrows it, steals it, whatever. Those spillovers are super important. And the spillovers are also in terms of your input-output linkages. If you have a firm making a certain output, but its input supplier is like 700 kilometers away, you're completely defeating that entire process for agglomeration. The second thing is matching. And that's where, Paramjit, your chart was fascinating, because matching, and we've seen this from data for different cities. Cities which have solid transport infrastructure. Somebody living in the north of the city, a poor person can travel to the south if that's where the job opportunities are. And so that's where that transport, Madam Tara was making that point about, from the citizen's point of view, the housing and the transport. How do you get there? If we're not thinking about that, we're completely messing up. We are really not grabbing the potential that's there for our cities. Now, the question of, okay, what do we do about it? I think, the planning side is absolutely spot on. But, you specifically asked me what is unique. I would say not just in India, but in South Asia, when we compare to other parts of the world, whether it's East Asia, whether it's Europe, whether it's the United States. And that is that local governments just are not sufficiently strong in our context. Economic development is a function that's being taken by the center. It's being taken at the state level, but it's not coming down to the local levels. And you could take two polar extremes. You can look at a Chinese city where the mayor and the vice mayor's promotion is just based on one metric: how much investment do they bring to the city? On the other hand, you can go to Manhattan, the most capitalist city you can think of. And Manhattan has a very strong mayor. There's one particular deputy mayor with 4 offices under them. One of the offices is focused on ensuring that the engine of Manhattan, which is the financial sector, continues, doing well. There's a second office which is looking at the small entrepreneurs that make Manhattan a nice, livable place. There's a third office that is focusing on what new things that can grab and bring in. Life sciences, AI and life sciences, etc. These things may fail or not, but the point is the decision making is being taken at that particular location. And I remember when we were doing the study for NITI, actually in 1919, in 2020 we started. I came across this very nice statement by a political scientist. He was just talking about local governments in the United States. And he said, the fact of the matter is capital is very mobile. If I have capital, if I have if I get a higher rate of return, boom, then my capital is going to flow to wherever it is around the world. But cities, people are not as mobile. They're tied to their cities. And so if you've got to, they are the best informed about what they're doing and what they could possibly do. And so I think I think what we need is more local thinking about what is it that makes our city tick. So what is it that we're doing right now? And I'm not just thinking about the large plant, chemical plant or pharma that's on the outskirts, but what's happening, what's happening in these small clusters, whether you're making locks or some sort of textiles products or the EV recycling. What's their vision for themselves? Where do they think they can get to in the next 5 to 10 years? And we have to support them in that visioning process. And then we need to understand what are the things that constrain them and how can the public sector deliver the inputs. I'll just say that in neoclassical economics, there's a complete, I think it's a total fallacy that all you need to do is just, let markets work perfectly and then boom, just the magic of the markets is going to work. The fact of the matter is that any sophisticated type of product requires a number of inputs that are only going to be provided as public inputs. It doesn't matter whether it's a special type of truck. You need parking for trucks outside the industrial park. A common treatment, effluent treatment plant, common tool rooms, etc. These are public inputs. And somebody has to make a decision on how to spend public finance in providing these. And of course, you need a PPP structure. You can't just say, here's the public money, do what you want. I think we need to have a system in place. And a number of people, the high-level committee of MOA has basically talked about the need for city economic development centers. I think we need those. The challenge is, what's that structure going to be? Where is it going to be housed? Anshulji was making, I think you were making one of these points about the economic planning and where it should be based, the land use, etc. And so now we can think of different issues. Some people have been saying, put it in the development authority, because the development authority is the one that is talking about land use, but they're not thinking sufficiently about the economics of the city. And maybe, have a city economic council or something, or that is actually located within the development authority. Some people say, no, this should be at the district level. Others say, no, don't start another institution. And so I came across a very interesting thing that there's an organization which is, I think it's called GAME. It's based in Bangalore, and they're basically for mass entrepreneurship. It's a global alliance for mass entrepreneurship. And they're working in Nagpur. What they're doing is they've selected 6 or 7 sectors where which they feel is really what drives Nagpur's economy. They've set up these sector groups, and they're doing exactly that. They're bringing together these entrepreneurs in these different areas and saying, what do you need to do better? And then they take this information and they filter it up. And I'm just going to end with one thing. Thanks to Madam Tara, we actually visited Chennai. And there, thanks to Anshulji, we were able to have these fantastic discussions with different stakeholders. And, one of the anecdotes that I really took away was a discussion with Guidance. And Guidance, you had very kindly arranged this meeting with Guidance, and there were people from the local chambers of commerce. Somebody had come from Coimbatore, and they were talking about how there's a SME cluster which is fantastic in automotives. but they're getting very worried about this whole electric vehicles, etc., coming in. And the group together has basically said, okay, look, we can actually tap this new industry, but there is a certain type of technology that we need help on. And I think in Tamil Nadu it has worked very well. There's a system whereby this information is flowing from the local level to the higher levels, and now somebody is going to be providing this. I think that kind of informational flow from the entrepreneur citizen to the different public agencies which provide these public inputs is very critical. I know it's very difficult. I mean, how do you design this institution? But I think this is where we really need to focus on. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Rana. I think the examples of holding mayoral responsibilities in driving cities and then linking that with the capital. We've spoken, it's a masterclass, we've spoken about land, labor, and capital as an economic development tool. I think what we need to now listen from Purnima Ji, you've worked on regional economics. My question is largely on regional economics has a lot of diversity, especially in the Indian context. The diversity of Indian cities, how that could be leveraged at the local levels to improve economic prosperity, and largely the way that we would want to both measure it and also sustain it in the longer run. And that's the question for you, because you've worked on this area for a long time. Thank you.
Thank you, Harpreet, for your question, and thank you, Rajit and team, for having me here on this important question. And it's been great to, I think since the morning, look at how we are thinking of place as an important fulcrum for development. And one of the things so I came across the term agglomeration. I'm from the business side. I used to be with the Tata Group for many years, and I stumbled upon the term agglomeration when I started trying to understand why do certain regions grow, why does investment flow into certain places. And I think I was looking at how do we structure financing for companies that want to grow. And I realized that terms like these are not part of what we talk about formal and informal sector in employment. I think the development sector also has a formal and informal sector. There's a formal sector here that uses terms like these, but bulk of the people involved with unpacking some of these are not talking in this terminology. So I would like to, come at it, the questions that we're talking about, from 2-3 angles. One is, I think that how we are going to solve for it. I was, I think, very, very happy to see the last couple of years, I think for the first time, while economic activity has been happening, talking about it very formally in terms of it being part of the planning process is something that is coming to the fore. But it is something, as ma'am says, has been happening organically anyway. And if I had to draw from, what Prana, you were sharing about from the industry point of view and from the policy point of view, there is a lot of planning of investments that happens, and there is geography playing a very important role there. We tried to build a index pan-India to look at, is specialization driving the story or diversification? So at the local level, are we looking at certain sectors, identifying the top 1 or 2 which are really going to drive it and build that as the growth hub case? Or is this going to be this basket of 5, 6, 7 key areas? And as you all have, I think, outlined for the Surat case, you've looked at some 5, 6, 7 that I see mapping out there. I think it's very important for us to be able to do this for all cities, which are our, strengths. What are those 5, 6 engines that are creating growth, that are creating the jobs, and where people locally believe that this is going to have that potential? Because while some plans look good based on the past trajectory, that is not where the world is moving, I think, in terms of jobs. And there are a lot of newer ways in which people are getting employed. I think when we travel, we do find that now in many tier 2, tier 3 locations also, people are taking up roles connected to the big metros, global roles that people are operating from different places, even if it is more tech, digital. So how are all of these interfacing with how economic value is going to get created. And I think looking at GST data is going to tell us a lot more in the future, because that is very, location specific. I don't think we've had that kind of information in the past to be able to tell that kind of narrative. So 3-4 levers that, and with Amita and Jagan, I think we've looked at migration over the years on how are people moving for work. And what does that also mean? Because agglomeration, from what, if we wanted to distill it in a nutshell, it's actually firms choosing where to go and people choosing where to go and be. So choices of firm at a firm level and choices at individual household level is kind of explaining why some regions are growing. Why are you choosing to, set up shop in a particular place? Are the incentives both for the firm and for the individual household in alignment? And in places where that is happening, we are seeing that growth more. Sometimes it is incidental, sometimes it is by design. And so there is one part which is this whole what firms will grow, what kind of incentives need to happen, what will attract investment in the growth hub, or the if I looked at what the Urban Challenge Fund should look at. This is one part. The other part is, why should people come there in the first place? So this choice, if I have to choose, do I choose to go to Bombay? Am I choosing Gurgaon? The same nature of choices, I think, that most of us make. Even in the informal sector, I think a lot of choices are driven by similar things. Will my child find education? Will I get healthcare at a price point that is manageable? In case of entrepreneurs, is financing and funding going to be available for me? So what is the banking footprint like? Where do you have places where actually good regional managers want to go? It's a question of who is that person sitting at that seat at that time who will open up those doors. So I actually, in this, and I think in conversations where people talk, when I'm talking about the book, people ask me, okay, what is the solution? I don't have a ready answer, because it is fairly complex. But the answer, I think, is somewhere in this mix of what we've been talking about since the morning, about how will these ideas of industry come together locally in that place. And there I completely concur with you, that our answers are not going to be at state, maybe not even at, to some extent, yes, district maybe needs to get more empowered, but locally, a lot of the energy around this has to be in the place themselves. And for that, we need some kind of proper institutional architecture, which will bring the kind of plan that you're making, have a life beyond the plan, when the concerned municipal commissioner is not there anymore, when the certain principal secretary is getting transferred. But is there that mechanism, which could be a national level institution, which also has hubs, which is allowing for these plans to come together? One of the thoughts could be something like a regional growth lab, is an idea that, I would like to place, where each location you have something called a regional growth lab, with a choice of where to house it. It could even be within an academic institution, or it could be placed within government. I do understand that creating a fresh institution takes a lot of energy. I would myself wonder why one would want to create, put fresh resources behind even getting approvals for things like that. But where the mandate is very clear that entrepreneurs can go to this place, we have such good researchers even in local institutions who want to do something about questions like these. And when I travel, they ask me, hum isme kya kar sakte hain? So if we had a way to channelize this energy with what we are talking about Viksit Bharat, with saying that we want to, we have started some of this in some of these big locations, but we're going to take it to a local level, even in a Mumbai, but also in a place like a Raipur, which is right at the heart of India, where so much growth and development needs to happen. It will be a fulcrum for Chhattisgarh, the north and south, where so much development is needed. But Raipur is a place where industry is willing to come. Similarly, if we looked at a place like Ranchi, these newer capital cities are also places, I think, that need capacities, that need planning. And so I'll close with saying so I think regional growth lab as a concept, which is like a living place, where a plan has the opportunity over time to build in local communities, to build people coming and going, but having people know that this place is going to stay even after, respective individuals or industries may choose to, shift shape. So having that place, I think local CII units in a way play that role, but it's still very amorphous because it depends upon the office bearer at that time and things like that. But having something which is very designated, the way a school is a place where when you go back to your alma mater, they're always there. Something like that is what I think this kind of idea would probably need. And yeah, I would just close by saying that bringing in tools like data, capacity building, which I think now a lot of it I see starting at a macro level, but rooting it in what people want as priorities, which are those 3 industries that the local people believe that they would want to build and stay with. For them finding place in these plans and having a continuum for this is what I would, advocate for. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Purnima. I'll move on to Jagan. It's great privilege because Jagan has played very important roles in conceptualizing some of the previous missions, some of them including Smart City one, in which cities have been able to prioritize, as you've said, and then put up through, again, a challenge route in which they would want to bring their visions to project devising and then delivering it. What I wanted to learn from you, Jagan, is what's your advice now? We'll have an urban challenge fund. We would also have commissions of similar sort going to cities and saying, this is again, direct fiscal benefits are shifting towards more challenge ways in which you will be holding responsible for using public monies and incentivizing benefits that pass on to the citizens, as other speakers have said. How do you think, what's be your advice and the way cities should see in prioritizing these? This is a complex, as you always say, it's a systems of systems. But, what are the ways in which they can do it? How do they do this? Over to you, Jagan.
Thanks, Harpreet. Thanks for having me in this session. I think it's very grandiose for me to say that I helped co-create, but I had the privilege of working closely with mission directors to design some schemes, and some of the insights one gains from the very deep deliberations that take place in that process. I'll just sort of share a few thoughts. I'm not sure that I should be advising cities per se on the pipelines of projects they should submit to the Urban Challenge Fund. But I think I marvel at the government's bold move to move away from schemes to a fund, and I think that's hugely significant because they're possibly moving away from defining what we should do to how we should do it, and to do it with greater fiscal responsibility and so on. So I hope that we stick to those basic conditions and we don't give more than 25%. And we don't define that we should only do water supply projects. So to that extent, I think I'd like to draw attention to what Madam Tara said about, essentially the fact that what we have is a growth model where we are willy-nilly ending up including, although not providing the same standards to everybody. So our cities are inclusive, almost forcibly so, but the same standards are not being delivered. And I think if there is one advice, I would say that, it's crucial that perhaps the conditions precedent for a project to be considered under a fund like this should be fairly stringent and should be linked to monitoring over time, possibly sort of a P4R kind of thing in the jargon of the World Bank, so that we're making sure that outcomes are what we are focused on rather than the investment in a particular asset. I think what is, to my mind, crucial is also to understand the brownfield and the greenfield distinction. I think we often paper over that, and I think that it works against us. So we are, as Madam Tara said, we are looking at the creative redevelopment proposition in a much more serious and deeper way. And I think that's how we should be doing it as a country. What is this creative redevelopment? It can manifest itself in multiple ways, but I'll take a few sort of examples where, and both happen to be from Odisha, but forgive me, that's only because I know them more closely. Rourkela, empowering SHGs led by women in local markets to set up cold rooms so that perishable produce is not wasted at the end of the day. Reducing food waste by 30%, relying on solar energy, using e-commerce to deliver fresh produce to people's doorsteps. That level of innovation, to me, that's creative redevelopment of a local marketplace, the kind of, PM Swanidhi kind of, scheme. And I understand Swanidhi now 2.0 is going to also provide for infrastructure, which is really crucial. And we as a foundation are promoting cold rooms, at a larger level. And there'll soon be an article about that. So I think this brownfield context is a very important and creatively full of possibilities. And we need to focus on that. If there was another advice, I would say that, look, there are must-haves that all cities must have, basic services, for instance, and perhaps we need to continue to do the Swachh Bharat and the Amrut programs, which are allocative programs, which provide for particular things. Jal Jeevan provides, we must make sure that everybody gets that. But I don't think the UCF is the best vehicle to actually deliver on a water supply scheme. Maybe on a better water supply scheme where where NRW is very high, but those kinds of interventions. I would say that overall, what we need to shy away from also is the determinism that tends to come with planning, right? This assumption that we can actually predict where capital will move, and as Rana very wisely told us, that capital can decide to up and leave. So what are the conditions in which capital decides to stay, right? And therefore the access to a thick labor market, maybe depending on the industry, the access to infrastructure. If there is determinism, infrastructure is it. And I would say that transportation infrastructure is the most deterministic because it determines land use, divisions and land use availability. And we need to pay more attention to that. In the brownfield, how do we improve mobility and access to everybody and universal access to everybody is going to be a big challenge for us. I think housing, it has to be right up front in terms, again, Tara ma'am said, does everybody get a decent house to live in? As per their means and as per their resources. But even that is not available, right? Which would also make us rethink, what is informal and what is formal. Is Sangam Vihar, which houses 1 million people in Delhi, is it informal? Actually, it is technically informal. But it is as formalized as you can possibly imagine. And we are now beginning to also add formal infrastructure to it. Now, what is the creative redevelopment that is needed for a place like Sangam Vihar? It needs emergency vehicle access. It needs the kinds of value additions that will make it safe and livable for everybody. It needs open spaces. It needs green spaces. So there is such an enormous universe of potential interventions that can be supported through the UCF that for me to advise anybody, would be nonsensical, because it has to come from the bottom up. But there is a lot there. And I just want to close with also a point which I made in the plenary, but the importance of shifting to recognizing every asset, in our cities. I mentioned bollards versus sewage treatment plants, but basically to move away from recognizing infrastructure as an agency-driven infrastructure. Roads, PWD. But no, the neighborhood road is an asset that the neighborhood needs to take ownership for, whether it is the local councillors, MLAs, whoever it is, but that asset is theirs to really work out over time how it's going to be maintained, how it's going to be kept clean. And I think in that, again, I will take an Odisha example where I think, again, now the government has picked up the string on what they call the Livable Habitat Mission on the back of the Jaga mission, where when I was at DFID, we supported the government to start thinking about precisely what Amitaji mentioned, that why can't these slum development associations become the hubs of waste management, for instance, because they're located very well. They're distributed and they're located closer to where the waste needs to be handled rather than trucking it to the outskirts of the city. So that circular economy originates within the city. I hope actually get this kind of a pipeline of projects. When I say we, I hope the government really gets this kind of pipeline to work with. And lastly, I would say that, essentially we're looking at infrastructure investments. The informal is the first to capture the windfall gains from that. And with the windfall gains also, it creates the negative externalities which we need to control for. So I think a lot rests on how we design the UCF, and I'm sure it will be designed keeping all of these kinds of, I think, the experience we've had over the last several decades in dealing with urban projects. So we must make sure that those windfall gains and the capture of that does not lead to negative externalities, which then burden and become the legacy that lasts for decades and decades and very difficult to deal with. So I'll just pause there. Thanks.
Thank you, Jagan. Thank you very much. Last not the least, and thank you very much, Shantamayji, for accepting the invite to join us. You have worked in the past, and if you would want to elaborate on the interconnections between the livelihood opportunities, climate concerns, and how whether UCF or broadly can address this in more sustainable and economic, equitable development. Thank you very much.
Well, am I audible? I'm sure. So this really is very crucial, not being just at the last when we're all hungry and looking at answers, wind up and move for the lunch. Is also because the complexity at which we tend to ignore urban poverty and climate. It's a nexus. So I would try to be quick. Drawing from my first project I was deputed to, which was CASP, Calcutta Urban Services for the Poor, way back in 2004, and then kind of looking at for the last 5 years, drawing from experiences in Dhaka, other countries, and India, currently in the last 5 years, working and addressing ultra-poor poverty in India, helping and supporting 135,000 ultra-poors come or take a quick leap out of poverty in rural sector, and currently supporting the PMU in Bihar, which is government's first urban level ultra poverty program. Most of us may not be aware of it. It's called SJY, Satat Jivika Uparjan Yojana, where we are targeting out of the 237 ULBs, 1,97,000, 1.9, I mean almost 2 lakhs actually, because 18,000 have been added last month. And besides PCI's own work of around last 4 years almost, with 35,000 population across 5 major metros, women entrepreneurship through digital, e-waste management and different other entrepreneurship opportunities, etc. So what have I come to understand out of all these data mixes and done to a very core level with the SJY data being monitored, kind of at a global level with JPOL South Asia supporting us, which is the IFM lab. Some of the findings have got into poor economics of Professor Banerjee. So one is that this nexus of poverty and climate is not something about only the poorest of the poor being affected. It's going to be part of the lower middle class, so-called, as we wish to remember or define Indian economy. That's a very crucial thing. So looking at a huge number of people, including women, working on the street as salesperson, fitting something, mending something, very small household-based units stuck deep into different kind of neighborhoods across the country in all the cities, breaking batteries, making some lead work, using polyurethane, stitching bags, all, which makes our city something very lovely because we get whole diversity of food, products right at our doorstep, delivered, etc. because of these people. And we just tend to ignore them, or we look at lovable or livable housing in terms of quarters, posh, biodiversity, but we never look at them. And when we think about doing something, we tend to move them out of the city, 30, 40 kilometers out in a new reconstructed kind of a colonial stuff like that. But then again, for them commuting to the city and delivering, the day for us, because In a city, most new couples would be able to work or attend to their work because somebody comes up and cooks things up for them. And these are people we tend to ignore. So this is not just part of it, and also the kind of people who are looking at, passing their MBAs and working as a salesperson, running here and there, supporting a shoe store to, delivering bed covers from one location to the other. So the entire
Mr.
complexity
Shantanu?
of this is the rising
Mr.
heat.
Shantanu, if you could just kind of summarize, because
Yeah,
we're at the
no,
end of the.
that
Yeah.
usually happens when you tend to overlook things. So, three critical things that I would try to spell up, which you might be able to break down. One is that both flood and heat are conditions which are extremely happening. And flood, we tend to ignore. We're more looking at heat days, heat islands, etc., because our cities are going vertical. There's a huge energy requirement which is there, and the safe housing habitat issues are strong, and none of these are going to be solved very easily because finding sanitation lines, we have been working with Patna Municipal Corporation. It's very difficult to move out because the entire sanitation, everything has been done, planned in a way which ignores the so-called unauthorized settlements, occupied lands. It's extremely difficult. We have not been able to provide or prove an answer to it, or not in the 237 ULBs. Second is, I think we should look at the fund to be utilized in two ways. Larger cities or the largest metropolises would be the most challenging ones, but if I'm looking at up to tier 5 or tier 7 in terms of population density and other definitions, we should look at the smaller cities growing up or the urban centers to address the challenges because they have a scope to do something rather than Mumbai trying to do something. It's extremely important or difficult for larger cities to create something very new out of it. But smaller ones, beginning now, could do better. Third is there has to be pockets and, kind of services available, particularly in the markets, etc., as rest houses, safe water access, so that people on the streets can actually rest, address things, including here. Last year, there has been 237 kind of very severe heat strokes in Patna, including around 14 to 17-year-old girls or children who have been walking or icing their parents. There was hardly anyone to pick them up or send it over time. So, only 2 dates, if we like to say numbers in that way, but definitely we need more information kiosk or, restings kiosk, something like that, several intervals in the main or key business places.
We'll
The markets
take
need
your
ventilation.
last comment because
Units and
overshot.
markets need a lot of ventilation, cooling down centers, different ways of climate resilient infrastructure. None of these units are regulated, mostly informal. We don't go to shopping markets every day, but a lot of markets happen. So those needs regulation and infrastructure readiness. Nobody's looking at them because most people don't go to them or recognize their kind of presence. So these would be some of the key points. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shantanmay. And just before we break out for lunch, Madhav is here, CEO of WRI India. If you could make the closing remarks, Madhav.
I'm not making closing remarks, but just 2-3 things, and I think I'll just say. One, actually, recently I was, State Bank of India is setting up a center of excellence on project finance, and I looked at all of their portfolio of things. It was all on energy, right? And I think there's a huge opportunity to think about this whole, transit around development to structure them as long-term infrastructure projects and, figuring out what are the financing terms. And there seems to be a lot of interest in the banks, but very little capacity. So they're tending to go to renewable energy and things like that. So, ma'am, one thing would be to see if we can do some kind of a conference with the banks, etc., because they're all setting up these project finance units, climate finance, they're talking, but there is absolutely very limited sort of understanding and knowledge. They're very bank people, but they have sort of large amounts of money. So that was one thought. Second was, you talked about capital, and Bangalore on the Outer Ring Road, all of the tech parks have been basically saying the secondary street network is missing, and that's the only reason we'll get up and go to Hyderabad, right? Because the congestion is not on the RT rail, it's because there is no secondary street network. And so how do you now build the secondary street network and finance it very brownfield is really the biggest challenge. That, and how do you fund it, finance it, and use this sort of creative redevelopment money to be able to do that. And we were talking about even just doing pedestrian walkthroughs, right? Don't even necessarily put a infrastructure, because there is all of this data security. So they have all of these campuses, but can they move that to lobby level? Can they allow people to walk through? So these are, and then last idea is, I think it emerged a lot when we were also doing some of this work in UP, is the idea of anchor institutions, right? Which, I feel like, I live very close to Prithvi Theatre in Mumbai. There have been attempts to move the film industry out of Andheri, which is the most congested place in the world. But that one institution holds it, right? If you want to become an actor, that's the place to start. They've tried to build Palava, they tried to build the whole thing. And I feel like, NID in Ahmedabad, so in UP, I think one of the suggestions was, can we create an NID type of institution, because there's so much craft. So how do we fund these type of anchor institutions? I think CEPT University has played such a role in Gujarat. That you don't see it anywhere. So how do we sort of, and this was, Mr. Sarabhai's vision, that IIM and all of, but none of where these academia, industries, that kind of collaboration institution. So this anchor institution also can be somehow built. I think that becomes the anchor, and it sort of builds on your point, but some of that. So that's another. How can we almost build an anchor institution infrastructure around some of these key sectors that we want to grow? And NASCOM, etc., is also a great example of that. But just broadly sharing these 2 or 3 ideas, and happy to talk more about this. Thank you.
Thank you, Madhav. Thank you, Tara ma'am and Anshul sir, for coming, and each and every panelist and the audience here. Thank you very much. Since we're running into lunch, I think this is the time to close. Any closing comment, ma'am, you'd like to make?
I want to. I was just saying here, I think what's happening is sometimes you get into this whole idea of we are limited by our exposure and experience, each one of us. And Mambo's just left. She said we should set up MRF. There are a lot of MRF set up under Swachh Bharat mission. People have been mainstreamed. So there is so much of information asymmetry. So there is a thinking person who is thinking that, what I have been seeing is what I have understood is what I will see. So I think there's a lot of information asymmetry. Second thing I would just want to tell is, see, you need to have all kinds of programs. You need to have targeted programs and schemes. Today, you are coming here and sitting and doing things, and Indian cities don't realize what you don't see. You don't see a lot of water cans being lugged around in your cities now. Do you see that? 10 years before you used to see that. Why don't you see that? So there are targeted programs required for basic infrastructure services in the form of service. It's one thing to talk, there's an outcome which is today 62% to 85% in Amrit cities, and overall the percentage of coverage has increased from 44% to 70% drinking water accessibility through taps. I'm not talking about everybody drinks water, nobody is without drinking water, but what I'm saying is 72% or 73% we've reached. So there are targeted programs which are today. You have waste to energy plants coming because there are targeted programs. And the programs are targeted because you want to pull resources from the state towards these important pressing needs. In cities, you don't have, so that's something which needs to be there. UCF, I think we are not understanding the basic fundamental thing of UCF. UCF is about mobilizing market finance for urban infrastructure. That's the first and only important goal. If you are crossing that hurdle, we can say it should not be used for water supply. What will you use? You need 800 billion. Okay? So infrastructure is without water, nothing can happen. You can have big roads and big this thing, but if there's no water, you go home. Go to the villages. So my request is, let's understand what is there. UCF is about empowering ULBs to empower themselves. So it could be any of the infrastructure projects. Water could be one of it. Because if your Chandni Chowk is collapsing because of a stormwater drainage collapsing, you better put a stormwater drainage there. It's an water infrastructure project. So I think we should not sit on judgment there. What we are looking at is how cities are going to warm up to this UCF. As you said, we had 2 or 3 sittings with the banks, but we will be, once our project is approved, I mean, we have got all the inputs. Project finance is different from UCF finance. Infrastructure finance is different from project finance. So ultimately, it is project finance. But I think there is much more to it than, and they're saying we have to have bankable projects. That means a lot of fiscal and financial discipline has to come into the ULB. But just to a curtain raiser, we have just done something which I think I'll inform maybe some of you may, as a small curtain raiser to check that the UCF, we wanted to target small municipalities. Many a times we've just under Amrut declared a fund of 300 crores and giving it to HUDCO to give a credit guarantee of around 70% of the first loan of up to 5 crores. So for only municipalities which are small, 1 lakh below. That has been passed, the guidelines will be out, and this will be a curtain raiser. And the UCF is going into process of approval. It has gone to now the finance ministry, which is after the lot of stakeholder consultation and all. But what I would still say is anything is a beta version. We can still modify, improve, work on it. And this 1 lakh crore, I'm totally focused on only one thing. How many municipalities will be able to utilize this fund? For me, the child going to school is more important than child getting into MSc or Masters after 20 years. So I want to get the child to the school. I want the ULB to use UCF. Once they start using UCF, then the conversation begins. It's not too much of money. 1 lakh crores should translate into 4 lakh crores. That means somebody has to invest 3 more lakh crores into it. It's not a joke. It's not easy. So everything has to change to align to this. So I think UCF is the most important challenge fund. There is a reform built into it. Anything you do, you have to raise 50% market finance. Story over. I think we are underestimating that power of that 50%. We are still looking at isse kya hoga? What will we do with this? Let them do what they want if it is adding to infrastructure. But let them first do. It's a bigger challenge to ensure that these guys access market and raise money. And number 2, usually we tend to focus on big cities, but you have to focus on small cities too. Nothing is unimportant. The challenge and the amount required is so big. Anything you do and everybody, whatever they said, everything is relevant. So I don't think any one of us should have, ideas which have to be boxed into set effects. This versus that won't work. In India, you have as many diversity in ULBs as much you want. Every strategy you said or every strategy deployed by government is working. So we are bringing in so already we approved one small 300 crore scheme, but I think we're looking at how UCF is going to pan out. There's so much hubbub about UCF, but we've taken all that in and put it for approval. Let's see. Once it is approved, we will tweak it. Guidelines is going to be second part. Conceptual strategy is the first part. So guidelines when we do, and also I would request that if any of the bankers, anybody who wants to hold, we will provide the time and space. We can have all consultations. Yesterday also SBI chairman was there in our ministry. So I think we have touched base with everybody. There is one RBI guideline which says project finance means there's some hindering thing. So all that is also getting taken care of. We'll have to work. Things are really, really important for us to push this. I take each one of them and I gained a lot of information because you guys have been telling me. And I'm sure Anshul also has gained and Anshul has done a great work. I think we'll take it from here. And I can only say let's establish conversations because a lot of information asymmetry exists. And everybody, we need to have a singular truth of some basic information so that we can build on it. And that can happen through such forums. Thank you so much. Thank you very much, everyone.